Welcome to Sober Talk. I'm Dennis and I have lived experience of alcohol. If you or anyone you know is struggling with alcohol, please call Alcoholics Anonymous on 1300 222222 or check out their website on aa.org.au. I'll just run through the preamble of Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of men and women who share their experience, strength and hope with each other. They must solve their common problems and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self-supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organisation or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses or opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics achieve sobriety.
My name is Jeff, and I'm an alcoholic. I had my first real drink when I was about 14 years old. Prior to that, I'd tasted an occasional alcoholic drink, but alcohol wasn't a big part of my family's life. My mother and father were virtually teetotalers, and I lived in one of the very few little villages in England that doesn't have a pub. So I certainly didn't have people around me that were, you might say, modeling alcoholic behavior at all. I also think my parents might have been rather naive about alcohol and what it can do to people. But anyway, they kept a bottle of whiskey in a cupboard that was there for medicinal purposes, and that bottle of whiskey lasted years and years. It's fair to say that from a fairly early age, that was my favourite medicine. But anyway, at 14, I went into a pub with a friend for the first time. I lived in a part of the world where pubs would probably gone out of business if they hadn't allowed underage drinkers like us in there. And I think I drank 4 pints of mild ale and went home feeling different from the way I'd felt when I'd gone there, but not really sure why or how I felt different. I just knew that I wanted to do this again. And so I went to the pubs that would serve underage drinkers with friends as often as I could afford to do so. And that meant that I suppose that I wasn't really drinking that much. And then when I was 15, I discovered, I'm not sure where I got this from, I discovered that you could actually make your own beer. So I did. And 12 months later, I discovered that you could make your own wine. I started doing that as well. So by the time I was 17 years old, I was awash with homemade grog. And for any alcoholic, it doesn't really get any better than that, does it? It's like having the goose that laid the golden egg. I can make my own. Then when I was 17, I left home. I went to Newcastle on Tyne in the north of England, north east of England. It was a big city to a country boy like me, and there were pubs everywhere. And I very quickly made friends with people who drank like I did. And so going to the pub now became the chief recreational activity for me and my friends. Wasn't really bothered about doing much of anything else except go to the pub. And in those days, I didn't have a great capacity for alcohol, so it didn't take a lot to get me drunk. So I was usually drunk by the time the pubs closed at 10:30, and I didn't really need to go on drinking after that. But I had started to get myself into situations where I was being thrown out of pubs, thrown out of nightclubs, and chased down alleyways by police officers for various forms of antisocial behaviour. And indeed, at one point when I was 19, the cops actually caught me. And I very nearly got myself into a lot more trouble than I'd imagined because of the nature of the offence that I'd committed. But I was very lucky. I didn't end up getting prosecuted over that. I was cautioned and released. And you might have thought lesson learned, but oh no, not yet. A long way to go before I was going to learn anything. So I spent 3 years at college, and I spent most of my money on booze and cigarettes and occasionally on hashish, which I didn't particularly care for at the time. I preferred drinking. And then I met a girl, and I fell in love, and I got married. And that actually put the brakes on things for me. Not that I knew that at the time. So much of what I'm saying here is hindsight. I wasn't aware of what was going on. But I managed to, I suppose I was a binge drinker, is what I'm trying to say. Whenever I had the opportunity to drink, I would drink, and I would usually drink more than other people around me. I'd end up in a state where I was quite obviously more drunk than anyone else. But nobody seemed to mind, or at least I didn't think they did. And it wasn't like I was creating big problems for myself. And as I say, it was, wasn't happening that frequently. But then when I was in my late 20s, I picked up cannabis again. To this day, I don't really know why I did. But this time I got right into it. I really liked it. And I was delighted to find that if I just put a bit of Visine in my eyes to get rid of the road maps and, and smoked a couple of ciggies after I'd had a few bombs, people couldn't smell it. People couldn't see it in my eyes. My speech wasn't slurred. My movements were not clumsy and awkward. Nobody knew. Nobody knew that I was off my nana. And so this was great. And from that period in my late 20s right through to my late 30s, that became the principal drug for me. I was still drinking, and whenever I had the chance to drink, I was still drinking far too much and getting pissed. But I'd now found this other drug that seemed to make it much easier for me to get out of it and yet to function, you might say. But then when I was in my early 40s, I think I might have been 41, 42, my wife had finally got sick of living with somebody who was not really there. And when we had this, what do you call it, a discussion about our future, I decided it would be better if I left. And she agreed. So I moved out. And I moved into a little flat in inner city Sydney. And I started to drink every day. And whenever I ran out of cannabis, I drank very heavily. And I now found myself in a situation where I started to delude myself that I didn't have any problems with these substances because I was able to put them down. So I could go without cannabis, but then I'd have to drink. And I could go without alcohol, but then I'd have to smoke cannabis. And somehow I thought this was great. I thought I was doing a really good job of balancing all of this out. But my life was spiraling out of control at this point because I was smoking heavily and drinking heavily. I ran into an old friend called Henry, who told me that he'd been clean and sober for, I think at the time, 3 or 4 years, thanks to AA. And one night he took me to an AA meeting. I thought I was taking him there. I thought I was giving him a lift there, but I now realize he was trying to get me into AA. And I thought it was all, for him. I didn't really pay attention to what people were saying. And I figured it was all just them. They were just all alcoholic losers, not me. And I hadn't got a problem, had I? I even remember one member saying to me at the end of one of these meetings that Henry conned me into going to. He said, how much did you drink last night? And I said very proudly, I drank a whole bottle of bourbon last night. And he said, you're an alcoholic. And anyway, I gave him a quick character reference and left. And still had no idea, did I, that there was a problem here. And then things got even worse because my wife was still keen to have me back, and I managed to convince her that I'd stopped drinking and stopped using cannabis. And I told her that I'd been going to AA and that I was now cured and didn't drink anymore. So the poor woman let me back into the house. And now I had an even bigger problem because now I had to hide it. I had to hide everything. I couldn't even drink openly, let alone smoke cannabis. And my life became infinitely more difficult because I was always trying to hide everything. And the stress of trying to lead this double life meant that I just used more and more drugs and more alcohol. And then one day And I'm fast forwarding a little bit now to when I was in my early 50s. And I was now drinking round the clock, and I was drinking when I was at work. And one day I finished an afternoon shift at, I think it's just before midnight, by which time I consumed a whole bottle of whiskey. And on the way home, I blacked out and drove into a tree. Every member of the emergency services that turned up at that accident told me I was lucky to be alive. And I can't help but believe that because every part of the car had been absolutely smashed to pieces, except miraculously a small bubble of safety around the driver's seat. I escaped from it relatively unscathed. And you might have thought that that would be a bit of a wake-up call, but I just decided that since I'd been drinking whiskey and had this accident, in future I would just drink wine when I was driving, and that would be much safer. However, just a few weeks after that, my wife finally called time on the whole thing and told me she'd had enough and it was over. And what I now realized was a desperate attempt by me to get her to reconsider this. I went to AA. I mean, this time I actually went to AA. I wasn't being dragged along there by someone else, however well-meaning, in order to try and save me. I was trying to save myself. Or was I? Maybe I was just trying to save the marriage. Anyway, I walked into my first AA meeting in Bondi Junction, and the secretary of that meeting was a man called Patrick, and he approached me and he said, "Are you okay?" And I burst into tears. I couldn't say a word. He said to me, "You're in the right place." And for the next 90 minutes, I listened to men and women of all different ages and from all kinds of different backgrounds describing their drinking. And every single one of them sounded like me. They were all telling stories about me. It was as if someone had already told them about me. And I related to literally every single one of them because they all talked about the way they drank. They talked about their obsession with drinking, how they couldn't go without it, and how much it consumed their lives. And I knew that this was the place I needed to be. And when I left that meeting that day, I remember at the end of it, Patrick said, "You can leave here today and never pick up another drink and be happy about it." And I thought, yeah, that's what I want. I want to stop drinking and I want to be happy about it. I got myself a sponsor. I got a copy of the big book. I joined a home group. And I started doing all of the things that they suggested I do if I wanted to stay sober. It was an amazing experience to go through the steps with a sponsor. In particular for me, the step 4 inventory acquainted me with aspects of myself that I just did not know were there. And whilst it was shocking and at times somewhat depressing, I just knew that this was something important that I needed to do because I knew I had to change. And I knew the change had to be something more than just not drinking. In the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, quite early on, I think he describes this program as a design for living. And that's exactly what I needed. I hadn't realized until that point that I did need some sort of design for living. I had no moral compass. I had no foundation. I really wasn't drifting through life. And I was jolting stunned all the time. So I stayed sober for 3.5 years in Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I started to get up myself about it and think, well, I've got God on my side and I don't really need to go to all these meetings, do I? And so I stopped going and I went away for a trip. And 7 weeks later, I was pissed and stoned again. And I was gone for another couple of years. People had told me when I first got sober that if I went away, things would get worse, that I wouldn't just go back to where I had been. They were right. Things did get much worse. I took more drugs, I drank more alcohol, and I was more depressed. And eventually I found myself curled up in a fetal position on the floor in my house, pouring my eyes out on a daily basis. At this point, my house had an armchair for me to sit in, a TV for me to shout at, and a mattress on the floor for me to fall onto when I'd had enough of trying to stay upright in the chair. It was a miserable, miserable experience. And I don't think I've ever been more unhappy than I was then. But I finally got myself together enough to realize that there was a place I could go where they have a solution, but I needed to go back to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I did. And I once again started going to meetings every day. I got myself a sponsor. I started reading the book, and I started going through the steps again. I have not been able to adhere to these principles of Alcoholics Anonymous faithfully for all of the time that I've been here. But I'm grateful for the sobriety that it's given me. I'm grateful for the sobriety that I've got today. I would not be able to do this without Alcoholics Anonymous, because I need some kind of a program to which I can constantly return that tells me what to do. I need a sponsor, someone who's been sober for a long time and who knows this program inside out, and they can give me consistent and reliable advice about what to do with the program. And I need the fellowship of other members of Alcoholics Anonymous. After all, if I turned up at AA meetings and I was the only one there, I'd be in the worse trouble than I am staying at home. So I'm forever grateful, I hope, to the people who turn up at these meetings and are part of this fellowship and the program, and as best I can manage it, some sort of service to the fellowship helps me to not only stay sober, but stay in a better frame of mind, to be in a better state of being. And that gives me a freedom I never had when I was drinking and taking drugs, to actually make sensible choices in life instead of making stupid ones. So I'm a grateful member of Alcoholics Anonymous today, and I couldn't always say that, believe me. So thank you for listening to me share, and keep coming back.
We have local meetings for the full week in the local area. Monday is Gala meeting at 8 o'clock. Tuesday is Elizabeth East at 8 o'clock. Wednesday is Elizabeth East at 8 o'clock. Thursday is Two Wells at 8 o'clock. And Friday is Salisbury at 8 o'clock. There's a meeting at Deveron Park at 12 o'clock. And on Sunday there's a meeting in Salisbury at 7 o'clock. And many other meetings in the area. For details of your local meetings, please phone 1300 22 2222. And once again, if anyone you know is struggling with alcohol issues, please call Alcoholics Anonymous on 1300 22 2222. The website is aaSouthAustralia.org.au.